the teachers didn't necessarily, respect the subject enough to give it the emphasis it deserved. And usually you're moved very quickly onto Roman and Greco-Roman times, and then into, newer cultures that we know more about, for sure. Mm-hmm. But Egypt, I remember thinking, wow, this was like thousands of years. That's crazy. What did they do? Well, it seemed to be a big mystery. You have all different dynasties. You have this unfathomable religion with animal-headed gods and this obsession with death as it was described to us. And so I think a lot of people just throw their hands up and say, I don't know.
Serapeum at Saqqara has basically impossible stuff going on there as well, with super precise measurements in those boxes. And how did they get them all in there in the first place? And there's all kinds of questions that go unanswered.
Yeah, that's another really interesting, and that's all related. I mean, Saqqara is one of the most interesting places in the entire world, I think. And
Me
if
too,
there's one,
I feel the same way.
If there's one Serapeum, there might be more. In the mid-1920s, when these were found, that's almost 5,000 years of people going up and down them. And to suggest that nobody took anything out is kind of silly. So, you can kind of extrapolate and say, all right, well, if there was at least 100,000 down there, probably a lot more. But this was just a collection of one person, plus all the other sites in Egypt where these were found, plus all the other pre-dynastic cultures. I think it's logical to assume that there were hundreds and hundreds of thousands originally, probably millions created, but we haven't unearthed them all. We probably haven't unearthed. We've unearthed a fraction of what's there. But this level of precision engineering, it rivals what we do now. It's not something that you can do by fixing this in the ground and striking it. It's not something you can do by hand without advanced metrology to know if you're achieving the levels of precision or accuracy that you've set out to obtain. Without Ben, I don't think we'd be in the position we're at. I've met so many people because of a video he made in 2022 with me and Alex and another guy, and that helped us link up with dozens of individuals. We have people reach out to us all the time with expertise and experience and offering to lend their services, whether that's digital, analytical, or physical material services to us and to our cause. And that wouldn't happen without guys like Ben. Ben's been talking about this subject for a long time. He's been focused on these granite boxes and precision engineering in Egypt. He's gone there many times. He's documented it many times, and he's served this up to an audience of curious people who can't just take off work on Monday and go to Egypt for 3 weeks.
Welcome to our new series,
Cosmic Monday.
It's almost time for the Cosmic Summit 2025 in Greensboro, North Carolina, June 20th to the 23rd.
Hey, we're generating excitement for the event, guys, by bringing you engaging interviews with some of the speakers and guests from this year's outstanding lineup.
So press in the promo code
Multiverse
to get 10% off your passes to meet, greet, and rub elbows with some of the biggest names on the cutting edge of suppressed and forgotten science,
human origins, and the history of planet Earth.
Join Mike and Dave at the Cosmic Summit,
where truth seekers go to party.
Sometimes, I don't know, in the wider conference room, surely, but you can actually kind of make news too.
Because sometimes the most important question that aren't being asked in the mainstream. And this summit gives us a space to ask them. And of course, I'm also looking forward to meeting people, both old friends and I hope lots of new friends also, that I can share the same curiosity.
Yeah. I have a huge announcement if y'all want to get into it.
Yeah, let's go.
Let's go right to it.
I have been in very good touch now with the Italian researchers behind the CAFRE project, right? And they're coming to Greensboro. And they're going to reveal entirely new information to a global audience.
What do you think the role of content creators like your Ben Van Kerkwicks, Wandering Wolf, Michael Collins, as far as bringing these topics to a wider audience?
Oh, it's great. I mean, without Ben, I don't think we'd be in the position we're at. I've met so many people.
Goodness, well, who doesn't have a fascination with the pyramids? Once you start learning about all of these things, well, what do you do with it?
A woman contacted me and told us a story about an artifact that her husband found 50 years ago working on a construction site. And it's an Egyptian artifact. And I have to tell you, this artifact is really, really interesting. But what the hell is it doing in Texas?
Can be passively accepted, spoon-fed models of reality.
Mm-hmm.
People who are willing to think independently, outside the box, free thinkers, who are coming together going, you know what? I think that this story of human civilization and human life on this planet is far deeper and far more complex than we've been told.
I got those pictures of the vases pulled up to the side. We'll flash them up whenever it's clever.
Yeah. So, greetings, humans. We got Adam Young here. It's Mike and Dave coming at you with another iteration of our Cosmic Monday series. We're hyping up Cosmic Summit 2024 in Greensboro, North Carolina on June 20th to 23rd. We have the honor of speaking to Mr. Adam Young. Adam is the founder of the Artifact Institute, which focuses on ancient Egyptian artifacts, particularly pre-dynastic and early dynastic stone vases, known for high precision scanning of Egyptian vases, revealing advanced craftsmanship. Adam will be attending for the second time the Cosmic Summit. He's the owner of the OG Vase, an ancient Egyptian stone vase analyzed with structured light scanning. We're really pumped to have you on the show today, Adam. How's it going?
Good. The honor is all mine. Thanks for having me, guys, and appreciate your interest as always. Happy to talk about Egypt or vases or whatever else you'd like.
Heck yeah.
Very cool.
Can we start off with your background? We can't wait to get into the Artifact Institute and these tiny stone vases, but what drew you into this?
My background's in math, in mathematics and financial management, so not really a related field per se, but understanding physics and understanding mathematical concepts, especially statistics and mathematical statistics, helped me put some of these notions in perspective. Like, how could it be that so many were made? How could it be that certain qualities were achieved? And those sorts of questions always blew my mind. They were always a problem for me to reconcile. I think all of us remember how we were maybe taught some of these concepts, ancient Egyptian culture and history in school, in primary school, and even secondary. And I think the teachers didn't necessarily, respect the subject enough to give it the emphasis it deserved. And usually you're moved very quickly onto Roman and Greco-Roman times, and then into, newer cultures that we know more about, for sure. But Egypt, I remember thinking, wow, this was like thousands of years. That's crazy. What did they do? Well, it would seem to be a big mystery. You have all different dynasties. You have this unfathomable religion with animal-headed gods and this obsession with death as it was described to us. And so I think a lot of people just throw their hands up and say, I don't know, this just seems alien to me. It seems otherworldly. Later on in life, I had a kind of a newfound appreciation for it. And that's what kicked this whole off for me. It was really later on. It was many years later, when I had extra time on my hands, when I was watching programs by John Anthony West, featuring Robert Schoch in the 90s, looking at documentaries that Carmen Boltard put together around 2010, and then finally went to Egypt, saw a lot of this stuff firsthand, and that I think opened my eyes for the second time and really for the final time. And from then on out, I was really hooked and fascinated.
Yeah, very cool. Similar story for me, in the 90s, the Graham Hancock stuff, Quest for the Lost Civilization, that Pyramid Code documentary really set me off as well.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, especially people who don't have a background in this sort of thing, get introduced through that realm, huh? It seems that way anyway.
Yeah, the Pyramid Code, that was picked up on Netflix at some point. So I think that really reached a pretty broad audience. And some of the things that she was talking about were really, I don't know how to phrase it or how to describe it, but it was almost like I knew it. It was kind of the reaction I had, was like, I knew there was something about this subject. I didn't know what it was or how or why, or I didn't even know that that documentary was 100% accurate. I had no inkling of, the accuracy or how true some of the notions were that she was describing, only to the extent that, yes, this does make sense, because there is a more profound explanation for this, other than everyone was obsessed with death all the time.
Right. And had a laundry list of gods too long to imagine. That who must have memorized all that? How do they spend their time memorizing all these detailed lists that don't seem to make sense to us?
Yeah, and that's the key. And once you go down that rabbit hole, if you will, and learn a little bit more about any one of these subjects, so hieroglyphs, for instance, and their quote unquote religion, you understand that it really, first and foremost, was a society that inherited a lot of knowledge, and that knowledge was scientific in nature. Those gods were netters. They were forces of the universe. They were forces of nature, and potentially a way of explaining and educating the population. Not, they at least it didn't start off as something you had to obsessively pray to in order to get benefits in the afterlife. That is what it became, but that's not necessarily how it started off. And any culture that lasts for thousands of years, you would imagine that, the two ends of the spectrum might look very different.
Yes. And we tend to interpret that ancient religion in the lens of our modern religious practices and belief systems, where, like you said, that may have been embedded scientific knowledge being passed through oral traditions and ceremonies, rituals, and tales and myths, that it contains some true information to survive the ages.
I think so. Yeah, I agree.
In the Pyramid Code specifically, I remember Carmen Bolton talking about the lens of the sacred feminine and how the Egyptians looked through that lens, as well as many others. Was there a particular part of that documentary? For me, it was, I'm trying to remember the name of the pyramid that looks like it blew up. Is it the Djoser, or no? I don't know. It's an open air pyramid, and they talk about that in the Pyramid Code.
Maybe it was Hawara. There's a number of pyramids where it looks like there are various levels of like exposure. So some of them may have been quarried, or stones may have been removed.
Sure.
Other times it looks like the casing stones were like almost like forcefully ejected. So I don't know exactly how all that stuff happened, but quarrying went on for a long period of time through the early 1900s, where just stones were just removed everywhere and repurposed for buildings, for grinding stones and everything else. So it might be a forensic examination that's required to really understand what happened to some of these things. Mm-hmm. But it's clear that they were a lot of them were reused. A lot of the sites were reused. A lot of the objects, statues, everything was reused over and over again for many, many thousands of years. So all of this is a big, big mystery. I think my part in this is rather limited in scope. I saw some of these vases, some of these anomalous objects, actually with Robert Schoch, 2015 or 16 at one point. But I had heard from various people that, there are these objects that are as precise or exhibit at least some sort of manufacturing acumen that's on scale or on par as some of the components of some of the pyramids and other structures that we see, the Osirian and others, and that no one had really taken the time or been able to analyze these properly, partly because they're in museums and partly because they're in private collections, which are in both cases not widely available to interested researchers. And so I kind of took that upon myself to say, all right, well, how far can we go? My wife and I collected a number of these 10 plus years ago, and then I finally started at least trying to do simple research, initial research back in about 2017, and it's evolved from there. So at this point, we have the Artifact Research Foundation, which is a nonprofit entity. There's like-minded researchers, engineers, mathematicians, metrologists that are involved, and our goal is to find, analyze, document these anomalous artifacts, from the vases to larger structures like granite boxes and buildings, to confirm or to memorialize other measurements that were taken in the distant past, like by Petrie and others. That's a big part of what we do, and then it's to examine and help spread the data that can answer questions like how are these made and who and when and why, and that's the driving reason, the purpose for what we're doing. Our strategy evolves, but right now we're we're focused very heavily on working with institutions like museums. We were at the Petrie Museum last year. We have 4 on the calendar this year. We may have another 1 or 2 by the end of the year. So that's Munich, Turin Museum. We have the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the Brooklyn Museum here in New York. Hopefully the Louvre one day, and hopefully the Cairo Museum after that.
Right.
And so all of those, I think, just give the the analysis credibility, and the provenance is something that's always been an issue. When we're looking at privately owned objects, there's always going to be some level of valid criticism, which is, did you just make this? Did you just buy this? But when we can establish that, no, actually, this has been in the possession of a museum that excavated this in 1903, and it's never left their hands, well, that helps a lot. And we can get into this more, but one of the primary reasons is because we have not always been able to make these objects. We can probably do it today, but that knowledge really came in around the 1940s-ish.
Right. So the Artifact Institute, as much fun as it sounds to go hunting for things Indiana Jones style, we're not quite talking about that. We're talking about chain of custody verification for these artifacts, and then having experienced metrologists coming in to document these things in partnership with institutions and museums. That's tremendous, Adam.
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah, I wanted to say too that you've mentioned that you really opened your eyes for the second or the third and last time was actually going to see this stuff in person, and obviously not everyone's going to get to go to the Cairo Museum. So is that part of the strategy to bring these things to museums in the US so that people can actually not just hear somebody on a podcast talk about it and show pictures, but you can go look at these things for yourself?
There's a few ways if you're interested in finding these. Most museums that have a decent Egyptian collection or wing or a permanent exhibit will have some of these. They're not always identified as pre-dynastic high precision stone vessels. Sometimes they're just called Old Kingdom vessel, early dynastic vessel, pre-dynastic container. You sort of need to recognize them, and over time you can. Right? When we did our Cosmic Summit Meteor Stream event here in New York, we did bring a few vessels that I happen to own. But museums in the United States and elsewhere do own these. So the Met, we were at the Met also with George and the Cosmic Summit team. We saw probably 10 very nice examples there. You'll see thousands. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo has thousands of them. The Louvre has some. The Petrie Museum had several dozen. And this was all, keep in mind that when someone's sponsoring an archaeological excavation or dig, there's a museum or an institution, Harvard, MFA would be involved. But you also have benefactors, right? You have people that are donating, the thousands and thousands of dollars that fund permits, logistics, hotels, materials, everything else that you need, and paying personnel expenses. Those people will probably take a lot of things back with them. And so like at Petrie Museum, that's rumored to be, and there are, I think 50,000 plus objects there. And that's supposedly the bottom 5% of what Petrie brought back, allegedly, right? So most of the stuff went to his benefactors, for the people that made the work happen. He also gifted and sold some, put them in museums and other private collections. But you can find these things. They're not rare. I made the point a few times at Cosmic Summit last year, and I've defended it a few times, that I believe there were millions of these made. I believe there were hundreds of thousands that were found. I believe probably most of the ones made are still not found. And we can document that. It's not always super easy and clear, but there's enough circumstantial evidence to suggest that probably 100,000 plus were put under the step pyramid by Djoser and Imhotep. And that was just one place where a large cache was found. They were also found in Abydos. We had cultures before the dynastic Egyptians that were found to be in possession of these, Akkad cultures and others, which is slightly upper Egypt, but then in the Giza area as well. So there's a lot of these out there. There's a lot of these that were found. Many were damaged. You can still find damaged pieces underground at the Step Pyramid and other places. And there's probably less than 50,000 in public exhibitions. There's probably something like 10,000. I don't know exactly. And then I would imagine that's a small proportion of the vessels that are in private collections.
Got it. I just think I was just thinking about it. As we get more and more information on how precise these things are, I wonder, is the value of them going up? Are they getting more expensive? Did you like get in like on when Bitcoin was like first? You know what I mean? Like,
Okay, we bought them all.
No,
Yeah.
this wasn't a Bitcoin trade by any means, but for a while, and that's still the case today. These are still undervalued in terms of what people want from Egypt, right? So statues, any statue of a human being or even a cat statue is generally regarded as being more valuable than these segments of hieroglyphics removed from a wall might be more valuable. So the statues always were, and that's still the case. You might see a bust, even in terrible condition, part of the head could sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars, where none of these vessels are that high. But they have, I think they've increased in value, but it's still, I think they're still underappreciated. There's still confusion as to who made these. Now it's the more study and research we do into these, the more we realize that actually there's consensus among the archaeological community in terms of where these were found originally. They were found in Egyptian burials and graves and tombs, but they were also found in cultures that predate ancient Egypt by 1,000 to 2,000 years or more. So that's primarily Nakata. The Nakata culture and others like it around contemporaneous with them. That can go back to 4,500, 5,000 BC. Remember, Egypt started around 28, 29, 3,000 BC. So almost 2,000 years earlier, you have a culture that was found to be in possession of these things. And that culture was rudimentary. By any stretch of the imagination, way more primitive than the dynastic Egyptians. They were living in mud brick homes. They did have copper and some other, I would say, forms of technology, primitive technology, but they did not have advanced machining capabilities to have been the ones that actually truly made these first. So where did they come from and when? I think is a question that no one knows.
Yeah, it seems like a question maybe the mainstream tries to avoid too, huh?
I don't think they know, and we don't know. It's not like anybody is, they're not even questioning it because there's no potential solutions. There's no propositions that would make sense. We don't know of a culture that came before Nakata that had any semblance of the technology to cut and then finish these things, right? You can use stone pounding tools to bring a boulder, to find a rock and to make it into something that looks like kind of round, like basketball shape. But this level of precision engineering, it rivals what we do now. It's not something that you can do by fixing this in the ground and striking it. It's not something you can do by hand without advanced metrology to know if you're achieving the levels of precision or accuracy that you set out to obtain. And that's because that these levels of precision and accuracy are not visible to the human eye.
Yes. So they're truly out of place artifacts. Maybe Ben likes to say that they're the best example of an out of place artifact, and I can't disagree because, like you said, there's no explanation.
Yeah, Ben has some interesting points of view and describes this in some cases as a tale of two industries, where we would see what the dynastic Egyptians actually were making side by side with some of this other stuff, like these anomalous out of place artifacts and components of larger structures like pyramids and temples that don't seem to coincide with what these people were capable of doing. Right? The Egyptians were known to have everybody uses pottery, but they used alabaster. This seems to be evidence that the alabaster industry took place over thousands of years. We have not seen any examples where the alabaster vessels were as precise as some of these stone vessels. And when I say that, I mean like in terms of circularity or how round something is. We're seeing measurements down to a thousandth of an inch. In some cases below that, 20 microns and below, which is not something we've seen in any of the alabaster vessels. However, we know that some of the alabaster vessels are very old as well, because they were also found in pre-dynastic burials. They were found under the step pyramid, which predates dynastic Egypt. And so it's possible that there was some advanced workmanship done in a medium like alabaster, which is much softer, right? You don't need advanced tool. You could use bronze with no abrasive to cut and shape alabaster. And so What were the dynastic Egyptians doing? I don't know exactly. It does seem like they were working in alabaster. It does not seem like they were able to achieve anything close to this in granite or the harder igneous rock.
Right. We're talking precision that rivals modern mass manufactured aluminum cans or glass bottles as far as how perfectly round it is, how perfectly symmetrical it is. We didn't even have the technology to measure perfection at this level, micromillimeter depth until recently.
Yeah, you can iteratively measure. You could perform simple metrology to measure distances that the human eye can't see. That's correct. But why would you create that to begin with? Like, why are you going to say, we live in mud huts, we're goat herders, or we have a primitive society, yet we need stoneware that's so precise we can't even see how imprecise it might be. That doesn't make sense. And I think this is a good point that I've kind of been ruminating over for a while. If you had that capability, the first thing you would do is improve your own structure.
Yes, your house,
right? You'd make your house out of stone that looked like this. You'd make other implements for your life. You wouldn't be making decorative objects, even if they weren't decorative and they were holding body oil and water and everything and lotus flowers. You still would apply that technology to other more beneficial uses before you did something that seems to be aesthetic for the most part.
Right.
Yeah. And like an example. Well, I heard on an episode of you were on an episode of Brothers of the Serpent, and they were kind of joking around that, like, why would you put beeswax in, like, you don't need. Yeah, exactly. You don't need perfection on this level to store your grain or store whatever it was that they're. And what I found interesting was that what was mentioned was that. Can you elaborate on this? The Egyptologists at the time were they weren't even talking about how precise they were. They were just studying what they put in them.
So, to my knowledge, when I first had these scanned with a structured light scanner in 2017, and we first started doing the work, no one had done that before. I don't know anyone that had. And even Petrie, he didn't study circularity. Circularity is difficult because what you're really doing is you're looking at the standard deviation of the radius as it moves, and you're looking at what's the deviation between this thing and a perfect circle or perfect geometry, and then you would have to apply that metric up and down the entire vertical axis to actually gauge it, right? So when we look at things today, we make mostly cylinders like drive shafts and other components of transportation and other things like that. We're not usually looking at complex spherical geometry. So to measure that properly really requires a point cloud data set. You really need to be scanning millions of data points. And so it's only really been possible recently. It hasn't been possible for very long. But certainly no one in the past had really thought to do that. They did measure the dimensions. They looked at dimensionality. Form-based dating requires you to compare the artifact to something else to see when it's from. If it looks like that, if it's very similar to that in form and dimensionality, then it might be from the same culture or group of people that made it. Sure. So they were looking at dimensionality, but they were not analyzing the metrology. The metrology is all new. And so when I started to look for people to help with that and to deploy resources into that, I just realized that no one had done this. And if you look at the technology that museums use and other institutions to categorize and record the sorts of objects that they have, they use equipment with much lower resolution. The equipment that they're using when they're scanning, they're doing photogrammetry or whatever, they're doing that for posterity, right? They want to catalog the artifact. They want to capture its form and its shape and its color and picture and texture, but they're not looking for sub-micron levels of specificity, because they're not doing metrology. No one had ever done this before. And the reason that we're doing it is because it speaks to the tool that was used. It speaks to the manufacturing capabilities. This level of workmanship that we're talking about, the highest echelon, can't be done by hand. It simply cannot be done by hand without either a fixed spindle, a rotating tool, and you can't quality control it without some sort of even rudimentary metrology. So at the very least, we can say that these people had something some working knowledge, something in their toolbox that they're not currently being credited with having.
Right. Let's say you do have a very primitive fixed spindle operation going on. You're probably not going to be cutting holes in granite with your first one. The first thing you're probably going to do is try to get a more improved shaft or bearing or whatnot for your spindle itself, if you can craft anything, and reiterate that a few times before you start making perfectly symmetrically precise, hand-sized vases.
And I think if you had that technology, you'd see it used in other, like a lot of these cultures are not regarded with having the wheel, which I think is silly to think about, but we don't see pictures of axles widespread, right? They did have chariots and things like that from time to time, but if they had spindles, if they had advanced lathes and grinding wheels and stuff like that, I think we would see the transportation system look very different as well.
That's a good point. Let me zoom out to 10,000 feet for just a second. The Great Pyramids of Giza were purportedly built at the height of dynastic Egypt, the height of their technology and power. We're talking about precisely cut granite vases from pre-dynastic, and you were even describing a culture predating Egypt by 1,000 or 2,000 years. We have no idea how this technology would have existed at that time.
I don't think it's a stretch to relate the knowledge base, the people that made these granite, very, very precise granite and diorite and other objects, seem to have an advanced capability in terms of working with stone, finely working with stone, not just rudimentary, but fine finishing work. And I think we see that in the oldest structures. We see that at the Osirian and Abydos. We see evidence of it in quarries. We see evidence of it in pyramids, the Great Pyramid, and a lot of the other, I would say, special pyramids, of which there's probably 14 or 15 that we still know about. I suspect all of it's older. I don't think that early dynastic Egyptians were responsible for the initial stages of construction for many of these. They may have been using the sites. They may have reused them. They certainly used some of them as burials. Yes. And they tried to make their own, but I think a lot of this stuff predates, what we think of as even the archaic time periods, and perhaps it's even older than these pre-dynastic cultures as well.
To me, that's the only thing that makes sense. Another spot would be the Serapeum at Saqqara. Has basically impossible stuff going on there as well, with super precise measurements in those boxes. And how did they get them all in there in the first place? And there's all kinds of questions that go unanswered.
Yeah, that's another really interesting, and that's all related. I mean, Saqqara is one of the most interesting places in the entire world, I think. And
Me
if
too.
there's one,
I feel the same way.
If there's one Serapeum, there might be more.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think that's probably true. And one thing that the number I keep hearing is 40,000. You're saying possibly millions of these vases were made. Approximately what, if you even know, approximately what percentage of these vases would be considered like modern in precision, like as far as like compared to our modern machinery? Do you even know?
That's a good question, because not every vessel that was found under Saqqara appears to be very precise, and it looks like something like half were alabaster. I don't know exactly. My point was, we know that one guy who was there for 2 years found 40,000 in 2 chambers, but there was other chambers that were collapsed, at least 3 others that were collapsed that he found. And so if you extrapolate, that's 100,000. And there was people there from the same team for 20 years before him, and I don't know exactly what was found then. There's probably documentation somewhere, but I haven't really seen it. And so what did they bring out? Not to mention, this site was reused for thousands of years by local inhabitants that were putting bodies down there. So there were thousands and thousands of mummies in miles of tunnels. And people have been going back and forth since Imhotep and Djoser, which is like first couple of dynasties. That's like 2800 BC. And so from then until 1920, the mid 1920s, when these were found, that's almost 5,000 years of people going up and down them. And to suggest that nobody took anything out is kind of silly. So, you could kind of extrapolate and say, all right, well, if there was at least 100,000 down there, probably a lot more. Yeah. But this was just a collection of one person, plus all the other sites in Egypt where these were found, plus all the other pre-dynastic cultures. I think it's logical to assume that there were hundreds and hundreds of thousands originally, probably millions created, but we haven't unearthed them all. We probably haven't unearthed. We've unearthed a fraction of what's there. So that's where the number of millions comes from. Is there any way to prove that? Absolutely not. So that's my subjective opinion, but I think it's based on extrapolation of sample size.
I think that's a good extrapolation, and I'm wondering a couple of things. First, do you happen to know the approximate population of Egypt around the time of, let's say, Imhotep? I have no idea off the top of my head. I'm just curious if you do.
I don't, but there were people inhabiting the Nile Valley for at least 500,000 years, at least. So there had always been cultures in that region. There had always probably, at the very least, been millions of people living in that area that extended into northern Sudan, right? That was all considered Kemet, that land. And so, so there's the fractious human nature means that there was different dynasties. Egypt was apparently united, lower and upper were united at one point. So, and there was a lot of wars. There was struggle. There was fighting over these regions. There was also trade. They traded with the Levant, with all the way up to Syria, with southern Africa, right? They were going down past the equator and trading down there. They were probably trading all around the Mediterranean. There's rumors that they were on other continents, right? So it's hard to say. It's hard to say who exactly made these things and where they come from. Were they even made in Egypt? I suspect yes, because they were predominantly found there. But when? It could have been many, many thousands of years before the cultures that were now found to have been with them that actually made them. And some of these pre-dynastic cultures were trading too. The Badarians and the Akkad civilizations, they traded with regions in the Levant and Syria and the Holy Land extensively. This is 5,000 BC. And so, we just don't know. We don't know how far back this goes. And we don't know where else they might be, because as climate changes in Egypt, habitable land changes quite a bit. So there could be a lot of these buried out in the desert.
So when you first traveled to Egypt, Adam, did you I know Yusuf Iwan and all those guys, and I thought I heard you say you went with Robert Schoch. Who was what's the benefit of going with somebody like that, or Yusuf Iwan in the School of Chematology, versus just going for a run-of-the-mill Egypt tour through Egypt?
I think it's always worth it. It's an incredible country. It's a really incredible. Talk about an old culture where there's no end to the different the different components that arose. Even Coptic Christians are 2,000 years old, right? So the first time I went to Egypt was right after the Arab Spring, which I think the Arab Spring was like a year or two of just chaos in the region. No one went there for a while, for years after that. And that's the first time I went. And Robert Schoch was Muhammad Ibrahim, Yusuf Iwan. They were Yusuf, who's the son of Hakim, who's was in the Pyramid Code, if you recall. So he had just passed away, and we were interested in traveling with him, but his son and daughter-in-law were starting up some of their tour operations, and so we joined way back then, and that was life-changing. So if you have the ability and opportunity to travel with guides that are experienced, that know the locations, and then have connections on the ground, because that's also what it takes. I wouldn't recommend just signing up for an online tour where you have no idea who the people are. Make sure that they have a good rapport with the locals and can bring you to the good sites at the good times for opportune viewing. That's important. A lot of these sites, some of the more interesting sites that are not heavily touristed, you're basically importing here. Sometimes you're bringing in everything with you. There's no bathrooms on site. Even the guides and the staff at the site will only come when they're called sometimes, right? So they do this stuff. This does take quite a bit of planning.
And so traveling to Egypt with Robert Schoch, being like kind of the OG of redating the Sphinx and all that stuff, that must have been I don't know, for me, that would just be an incredible experience. So how did you feel? How was that? What was that like, just going with Robert Schoch, the man himself?
Yeah, he's an incredible, a really fascinating guy. He he's in this very interesting, maybe precarious position where he's in academia. and he also has alternative points of view, right? So he really has the benefits of both worlds, right? Like he's a scientist. He understands how the scientific method works, but he's also not afraid to step outside, the boundaries that were kind of put on his career path, and sometimes it takes someone brave to do that. Mm-hmm. He certainly is that, and he's endured his share of criticism over the years. But I look up to him as someone who's has been unafraid to state his perspective as long as he believes it's supportable, right? And he has some he has theories on solar flares and other potential causes of what may have ended the last ice age, and potentially could have resulted in some of this in some of this cultural amnesia, as Graham Hancock puts it, and that's been criticized over the years. So I don't know what the truth is, but it's important to have people like him that are not afraid to challenge this this narrative that was really pushed onto people from to some extent from an uneducated perspective hundreds of years ago, and then not really challenged.
Right, because you spend very little time on it, like you mentioned, in school. I remember watching The Mystery of the Sphinx with Charlton Heston. That's the first one that actually got me like thinking, I wonder if there's some actual questions going on here that I didn't learn in school. As far as Robert Schoch goes too, it's interesting with him because he doesn't jump on every one of these theories that somebody throws out either. He's very grounded in his scientific method. In fact, he ruined the Yonaguni Monument for me because I was all in on the Yonaguni Monument, and since like listening to him a few different times, I know and seeing some proof, I no longer think that it was like a underwater monument as people are suggesting. You mentioned the solar flare thing. I notice I like to ask a lot of our guests because in this community there who generally believes that human history isn't as we were told, and it may be possibly much older and it's cyclical in nature. What do you think is most responsible for the cataclysmic event that likely wiped out whoever built this stuff? Are you a impact theory guy, a solar flare guy, a combination of the two?
I don't think they have to be exclusive. I think you could have had, both these things could have happened at different times. Mm-hmm. I also don't know if the end of the ice age was the single thing that changed everything. I mean, it's possible we could be talking about cultures that existed far earlier than that, where by the time that happened, those cultures were already gone by some other third cause, right? So I don't know. I'd like to keep an open mind and think about and kind of work backwards, right? So what do we know between 5000 BC, which is when these pre-dynastic cultures like Naqada, Badurian, and others first kind of came onto the scene, where we first start finding evidence of them, and 10,000 BC, which is supposedly the end of the Younger Dryas and the end of the last ice age. We don't find a lot. There's not a lot of historical record there. We don't see other cultures in possession with these, at least to my knowledge. Maybe they were, maybe we haven't found them yet, but I haven't really seen much evidence of it. Why is that? The Naqada cultures certainly had no capability of making these things, yet had them. But we don't seem to find them in anyone before them. And so I don't think that means that right before 10,000 BC, we had this capability and then it was just cut off, because then nothing happened for 5,000 years. Why? So there could be a lot of explanations. There could have been other cultures that we just don't know about for some reason. Maybe they were a lot smaller. Maybe they were completely supplanted by others. Or maybe they were much, much, much older.
Yeah.
So I really don't know.
Yeah, it's about keeping an open mind, right?
Yeah, to the extent you can. There's certain things I'll say, I'll say the traditional explanation is wrong in this specific case, if I'm convinced it is. But I don't think there's not a lot of things we can be certain of here.
Nope. That's the challenging but fun thing when it comes to the remote past.
Right.
Yeah. Could you talk about Christopher Dunn and what his work has been as far as an inspiration for you, and I know that you've done some work with his son, I believe.
Yeah, well, Chris was the first person I brought this to back in, I don't know, 18 or something, 2018 maybe. So I reached out to him, and we went to Egypt together as well. But his son is a metrologist, and between actually his son and I started this project together, trying to expand, what we had looked at initially into other components of these vessels. How do we, what sort of technology can we use to more quickly scan, analyze, and document some of the work that we're doing. To be honest, Chris didn't really know what to think of it in the beginning until we eventually had a whole bevy of Chris's former colleagues who were machinists take a look at some of these about 5-6 years ago, and their minds were completely blown. And these are people that work at a defense industry manufacturer that works in alloys, typically metal alloys, and makes components for aerospace. And they had never seen anything like it. They were stunned because in terms of accuracy, when we're talking about granite, the most accurate things are inspection plates that we use to analyze, typically machined metal parts. An inspection plate is just that flat, rectangular or square platform that's 8-10 inches deep, and that's machined to a very, very low tolerance over that length. And it's impervious to heat and other fluctuations. So that's the reason they use granite. We just started using granite 75 years ago because we actually couldn't cut granite to that level of tolerance until whatever it was, 1930s or 40s. And so, Chris has been a huge proponent of this, and he's one of my idols in life, really. I look up to him more than almost anyone else. I think his background has just been a little different. He's been going to Egypt since the 80s, and he's put his personal reputation on the line many, many times. And he's come up with really comprehensive theories about how something could work. How could the pyramid work? If I'm going to say it's a machine, how would the machine work? And so I think that's led to a lot of criticism, obviously. But he's a very logical person, and he's always said, well, if I'm wrong, I'll take it back and I'll reconsider. But I'm just trying to create a working model of how this thing may have worked. I'm not saying every single component of that working model is true. Some of them might be, but some of them are just filler to explain how the entire model works comprehensively. And so, I really respect that, and I don't think there's any truer marker of a true scientific mind than his mentality. And so, it baffles me why people attack that, that approach.
And there couldn't be anything less scientific than taking a shallow explanation at face value and saying this is all there is to it, and I'm not going to believe anything anybody else says, no matter what. That's the absolute opposite of science.
Science says you have to be able to revisit things, right? You have to. You're disproving. That's the nature of the scientific method. You're disproving a hypothesis. You set a hypothesis, try to disprove it. And if you have something that people accept, you have to be able to defend that forever. Sorry, that's how it works. Otherwise, it's not true. Like this whole the notion that certain people made certain things for certain reasons. You have to be able to prove that. You can't just say, well, we know because we've always known it. We've known it since the 1800s, therefore it's true. Well, that's not science. That's religion.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. In sort of the mainstream zeitgeist right now, you're kind of seeing this argument come to, the forefront. Like there was a big debate about the Coffray Project SAR scans on Pierce Morgan recently. So do you see, with the advent of like just communication and internet making things so easy to communicate, and normal lay people being able to access all this information, do you see that improving now, like, and have hope for the future of like the two sides working together as far as like academia versus the speculators, as George Howard?
Yeah, it's certainly different than it used to be, and communication is probably a good thing on balance, but it also means that something you say can be taken out of context very easily. You can make a mistake that's now immutable, that's written into the into digital perpetuity. So we try to be careful. We haven't released even our Petrie Museum results, but we haven't released yet because we're not finished with exploring every single way we could conduct this analysis and making sure that it's peer reviewed. We don't want to make a mistake. We don't want to do something that we have to retract. And we're also not drawing hard conclusions. I'm not up here saying we know how these are made or by who or when. All we're saying is, let's suppose that you have a rudimentary primitive culture with, I think we have a rough idea of the types of tools they had, but we certainly don't think that they had machines. We certainly don't think they had advanced metal alloys. Could a culture like that have been responsible for some of the work that we're seeing now? And I think the answer is basically no. But we need to be able to demonstrate that, in a scientific, logical way. And I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah. And this is I'm not trying to take a shot here, but like that, I think that was what was done wrong in the Coffray project, right? They jumped to a bunch of conclusions. They put a bunch without a peer review. They put that model out there, and it sounds like what you're saying is being careful and precise with what you present to the public is important, because it lends credibility to these new ideas and to these new discoveries, right?
Yeah. It's hard when there's a lot of people with a lot of different backgrounds to, you don't want to use words like control. We're not trying to control the narrative. We just want to make sure that we're prudent and that we're conservative in our approach, and we're adhering to logic and scientific principles in every way we possibly can, which means not too much speculating. I love speculating and thinking about what could have been, but I'm not really convinced of anything. I have an open mind, and I can be convinced of certain things, but I'm not convinced I know any truths here, to be honest with you. I'm pretty convinced that the dynastic Egyptians and their precursor immediate civilizations, forebears right before them, didn't make these.
Right. Generally, if a human tells me, "Hey, trust me, bro, I got all the answers," I do not trust them.
Right.
That's just generally speaking. What do you think? What do you think the role of content creators like your Ben Van Kerkwicks, your Jimmy Corsettis, guys like that, and Wandering Wolf, Michael Collins, as far as bringing these topics to a wider audience? What do you think the role? Like, how do you feel about the role of those guys in this space?
Oh, it's great. I mean, without Ben, I don't think we'd be in the position we're at. I've met so many people because of a video he made in 2022 with me and Alex and another guy, and that really helped us link up with dozens of individuals. We have people reach out to us all the time with expertise and experience and offering to lend their services, whether that's digital, analytical, or physical material services to us and to our cause. And that wouldn't happen without guys like Ben. Ben's been talking about this subject for a long time. He's been focused on these granite boxes and precision engineering in Egypt. He's gone there many times. He's documented it many times, and he's served this up to an audience of curious people who can't just take off work on Monday and go to Egypt for 3 weeks. Right? It's hard. And the way he does that is, he's an intelligent, educated, well-spoken, nice guy. He's fun to be around and really understands it. I think he gets it. And he does an excellent job of really communicating this to the public at large. So, I watch all of his videos when they come out. I'm a friend of his and also a fan.
We feel the same way. He's an inspiration to us, and Dave and I hope to do the same thing, give people a platform. We're already curious about this stuff. We're already spending time digging into all of this ourselves. We said, hey, let's do it in front of everybody and share it with them. We can all learn together.
Yeah, that's great that you guys have started doing this, and I hope you continue for years, because there's a lot of stuff to talk about. I think we're at the very tip of the iceberg here.
We haven't even begun to get to the next phases.
Yeah.
It's true. I can't even turn on every time I turn on my YouTube, I'm like, there's so much stuff I got to watch, and so many different people. And Ben was a big inspiration for me as well. I watched, I went deep on the tube drills with Ben, like that was literally hours and hours. And, I think it's invaluable what he does, because he like you said, he takes you and walks you around all these sites, and he shows you everything. And it's also through the lens of what he's learned from Yusuf Awan and their I don't know if indigenous is the right word, but traditions. And so you definitely get a different perspective. And it was funny because that's what's so cool about Cosmic Summit. And I wanted to transition into there. Last year I was I stepped out of something to make a phone call. My wife called me or something, and I was on the phone, and then there's Ben Van Kerkwijk, just me and him out in the front area, and he's walking by. So I just literally go, hey mom, hey white, or hey baby, I gotta go. And then I hang up, and then I'm like, hey, Ben Van Kerkwijk, how's it going? And he stopped and talked to me for like 10 minutes. I asked him a bunch of questions, and that's what's so cool about Cosmic Summit is you're rubbing shoulders and hanging out with all these people, both researchers, speculators, content creators, presenters, and it's a really quite an intimate environment. What was your favorite part about last year?
I mean, I would echo everything you said. It's really probably the biggest right now conglomeration of people that are like-minded in this space, and there's something for everyone depending on what you're interested in. You're interested in South America, if you're interested in Egypt, if aliens are your thing, there's a little bit of everything there for different groups of people. I like what you said. I like just walking around and shooting the shit with people. I think it's a really good opportunity to meet new people and to hear different ideas, and also to see people, put their best foot forward and offer a presentation that they think will be cool. I could sit there all day and listen to this stuff. So I think, going back really quickly, what Ben and others are saying about tube drills, and there's a few people that have talked about it for years now, right? Ben in particular. I've spoken to a number of archaeologists that watch these videos as well. They're not all right. They're not enemies necessarily. Some of them are beholden to their university dogmas and they're worried about their careers in some cases, but they do pay attention to this stuff. More last year or two. Because you don't have a core drill that's symmetrical hole without some sort of a fix. You have some sort of an axis that's rotating, which is basically the same components of a lathe, right? You're not doing this by hand over and over again, 100,000 rotations for 3 weeks to drill one little hole and have it be that. It's not perfect. It's still not perfect, but to have it be that accurate, you probably do have to spin. So, I think just the number of and others have drawn to these subjects has already made its mark and has already resulted in minds being opened in the academic community.
Yes. Adding on to the statistics you were talking about earlier, it was a great illustration you did on another podcast. If it had taken one person 20, 25 years to make one granite vase by hand, their entire career would have been 2 or 3 vases. And how on earth there would have been hundreds of thousands of people who just they made 2 vases. That was their entire working career in that civilization. It's kind of absurd to think about.
Yeah. It's even if we could give even more and say maybe it took a year or 2 years. Okay, well, what's someone's output? What's the value of someone's output in a year? Let's say it took them 1 year.
Yeah.
Like that's effectively, it's a concept like GDP. Like what's the average output of a person? In America, it's $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, roughly speaking, something of that context. It's less in other countries, yes, but the price of goods, the cost of goods and services, the CPI of that country is also commensurately lower. So Either way, you have a person who's creating something valuable, like that equals like a house or a vehicle or something else that they would otherwise be doing in a year. Mm. What would you be doing in a year? You're not doing that thing. You're making a vase. Okay, so that vase is by definition valuable. It's on par with the opportunity cost of your labor and your capital. Yeah. That was the point, is that if you are going to say that there's 20,000, 40,000, 80,000 put in a single place, what's the value of 20,000 small 1-bedroom homes? What's the value of 20,000 Ford F-150 pickup trucks? A lot. We're talking about billions of dollars. Yep. I don't care if it's 1 billion or 150 billion. It's a lot of money to throw underground in a place that every single person knows about and walk away and walk away. It makes no sense. If you made those yourself, if you made them yourself using these methods, that no longer makes sense. Therefore, they were made by someone else and you found them, or it was very easy.
Yeah, and if the utility of the vases was to store, food or something, then you wouldn't expend that much effort. You wouldn't use that person's time they could have made a vase in 3 hours or whatever, like doing regular pottery or whatever, and then spent the rest of the year creating food or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and some of these were used for those mundane, use case scenarios. They were used to store olive oil and food and whatever else. That doesn't mean it was the original intention, right? I don't think you can use pottery, which is very easy and cheap. Most cultures make pottery that we know of, right? That's one of the primary markers of a civilization that's moved on beyond hunter-gatherers, is they're making pottery. So you can make pottery, it's cheap, it's easy to store anything. Why do you need, extremely advanced precision stoneware? Especially when you're not putting that into your primary shelter or other things. So that's never really made sense, but they were repurposed for thousands of years. Like these were found in some cases, Middle Kingdom burials as well. We know they were found 1,000, 2,000 years before Egypt. They were found all throughout Egypt. These things were reused by everyone. They were valued by certain cultures, like Nakata cultures. These were found they were not found in caches, generally speaking. They were found by themselves or with maybe another one, surrounded by a dozen or more pottery vessels. And so I think they were regarded as being astronomically impressive. Like they were probably heirlooms. They were probably very valuable pieces that people had respected and sometimes were buried with. Other times it was passed down to the family and then reused over and over again for another couple thousand years until sometimes it broke or something else happened to it. And we find broken vessels all over the place. They're reconstituted in many cases with cement these days or epoxy, but there's shards everywhere. I was talking about recently, me and Carolee, who's another member of the Artifact Foundation, and Kyle Allen and Ben, we were at the Step Pyramid back in December, and we went underneath it because we wanted to really get to the bottom of how many shards were still there. They're still there. Like to this day, 100 years after Loyer excavated, and he brought out the 20,000, the 40,000 everybody talks about, there's still thousands of vessels that were smashed and that were not excavated. They're sitting in piles. They're in the walls. There's collapsed chambers where the walls have stone shards in them from what looks like accurate or precision stone vessels in the walls. It's like insane.
Wow.
So during some sort of raid or something like that, just people were just in there smashing vases, I guess.
Well, the chambers, the story goes that there was a couple of chambers they called the magazines. It's just like a shaft chamber that had collapsed. We don't know why exactly it collapsed. It could collapse because the whole complex is like Swiss cheese. There's tunnels on top of tunnels, and so if you're digging, you could destabilize something, and that could have resulted in a collapse. If something collapses, what do? You just move on and go dig somewhere else until someone comes and excavates, right? So that preserves in situ that stuff that's there. In later years, in the last 10 years, when they were excavating all the debris that's down underneath there, they brought it up and brought it to the edges of the necropolis, the edges of the pyramid, and then backfilled over it. So there's thousands of metric tons of material that was brought out and then just kind of buried over. So there's pottery shards up in the desert all around the pyramid. It's literally it's unfathomable how many there were down there, and allegedly all collected by Djoser Nimhotep.
Wow.
It's an amazing tale. It's a true mystery.
Yeah,
it really is. I'm curious about the name, the OG vase. Where did obviously we all know what OG means, but how did that come about being the name of the vase?
That was the first one that was found to be incredibly accurate, where the circularity was 1,000th of an inch in some cases, or below that, in a lot of cases below that. The first group that I looked at, I think there was 4 or 5 objects, and that one was more accurate than the others, and so we just kind of focused on that, and that kicked off years of subsequent analysis. So that one we looked at with some metrologists and manufacturing specialists at a facility that Chris Dunn worked at in Indianapolis. And their first speculation was, how can I make this today? Well, I would use carbide tips, and I would do extra. They were effectively putting this into what their local knowledge was with respect to metal alloys that they're used to working in, the medium they're used to working in. And then they realized that would result in the tool breaking, right? Even though carbide's harder than granite and quartz, the crystals inside here in feldspar, it would still result in too much damage to the tool. It would probably crack the stone, and you'd end up burning through a lot of material just to create this. And so some of them made comments like, "Oh, well, then we couldn't do it today." I don't think it's true, because you're ignoring other less invasive other methods that don't introduce as much friction, like grinding and other material removal methods that won't result in the piece sticking into the stone or popping out a crystal or smashing the vase or fracturing the instrument or the drill bit. So there are, I think, a lot of other ways that these could be made, but this one just kind of kicked it off. So we call it the OG vase affectionately, but we found many more like it since then.
Is there one that's like the most that you know of is the most precise?
We've seen a number that are on par with that. Matt Bell has a few that are on par with that, and I have a couple others that are similar in nature. And so I don't know, we haven't seen another one that's like an order of magnitude more accurate yet. So that's would be in like your top echelon potentially of quality. And then there's others that we've seen that are a little bit less. So like when we were at the Petrie Museum, around half of the ones we looked at were somewhat similar to that, either as precise or like almost as precise. And then there's a different grade that don't seem to be. And so that could be, it could be because it didn't need to be. It could be because there was an apprentice learning how to make it, because the equipment they used was different. It could be a different time period. I really don't know why that could happen, but there's certainly different grades.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of Matt Bell, he's going to be presenting at Cosmic Summit this year, and you are attending as well. We'll be able to see a cool collection of these vases in person.
Yeah, I don't know if Matt is bringing actual vases. He may be. He does have a lot of 3D prints that he likes to bring. So definitely check him out when he's up there. And yeah, I mean, Matt has a very impressive collection of his own that would rival any museum.
Yeah.
Are you bringing any of yours?
I don't think I'm going to bring any of the stone ones this time. We had them in New York here a few weeks ago, but I don't think I'll bring any this time too.
Got it. George Howard was on our live stream last week, and he did mention that they were going to have a stone vase exhibit. I don't know if he has the full details of it planned out yet, but that should be interesting. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. And so this year you don't have the pressure of being a presenter, so you get to kind of socialize more. You get to kind of sit back and relax a little bit more. That should be a little more fun this time, right?
It was fun last time too. I really enjoy those types of conferences. That again, you don't really get the chance to meet so many people at the same place really ever.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, CPAC is another one where you'll see some people there. Cosmic Summit, and there's a handful, and so if you have an opportunity to go and hear these people speak live and meet them, it's definitely well worth it.
Yeah, CPAC is on our. I think they only do it every 2 years, possibly, but that's on our agenda for next year. We're going to Contact in the Desert in a month. It's our first UFO conference. Have you ever attended a UFO conference?
No, but I know some people have said it's a lot of fun. So
yeah, we're looking forward to it. We're looking forward to it. Should be a good time.
And then Cosmic's a few weeks after that, so it's going to be a jam-packed start to the summer. It'll be a blast.
Yeah, it will. We're having a small event here in New York the week after Cosmic Summit with Ben, Kyle, and Russ Allen from Brothers of the Serpent, and then me and Carolee Polka from Artifact Foundation, and that'll be the following Saturday in the city. So if you're in New York and you wanted to check that out, not the entire weekend, unfortunately, but for about 4 or 5 hours, we'll be speaking, and we'll have some cocktails and hors d'oeuvres for everyone.
Which weekend is it?
Cool.
It's the 28th, which is the following weekend after
Okay.
Cosmic Summit.
Got it.
So anyone coming down from that northward area down in Cosmic, y'all go back up there and hang out together. We got to do something like that in Atlanta, Dave, where we meet up with like-minded people, and once or twice a year in between the summit.
Yeah. We're actually meeting up. We're doing a little interview with Mr. Randall Carlson in a few hours, and he lives in Georgia. So hopefully we make that connection and maybe set something like that up. Maybe you can bring some of your collection down to Atlanta one of these times and do something similar.
Yeah, we'd love to. You guys seem to be a hotspot down there. Randall last year gave an excellent presentation. I really enjoy speaking or listening to him, and I've heard most of his Cosmographia podcast also. Really, really interesting. Especially if you have a long commute and you want something to listen to, it's that's great. Yeah.
Yep. So I guess go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, what have we missed any points so far? We have some rapid fire questions for the end, but we're saving those for the end. So I'm going to save those. What have we missed?
No, go ahead. Fire away.
Very cool. So this is sort of just a fun little kind of have the audience get to know you guys a little bit more in our Cosmic Summit interview. Or our Cosmic Monday interview. So first question, if you could travel back in time to any time and place, where would you go?
I think archaic Egypt, so right before the early kingdom, right before the old kingdom, so like Dynasty 1 and right before that period would be interesting, because that was the pinnacle of their alleged knowledge base, right? They started from the top and went downhill for 2,000 plus years. And so that would be interesting to see, like, you don't just start from nothing.
Yeah.
What were people back then saying about where the knowledge came from? That's the source, right? What were they saying? They would probably they would probably tell you some truths in life.
Technology goes one way, not backwards, unless there's a cataclysm of some sort, right?
Right.
But this would have been 7,000 years after the cataclysm.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Strange.
But in that period of time, history was rewritten over and over again. And so we don't really know what happened when they started. What did those people think when they started off? They certainly had a scientific mindset. They certainly approached their society much different. Like you were saying in the beginning, there was this duality of masculine and feminine. They had just a very different way of looking at the world. And all that changed over a couple of thousand years. And so it kind of unraveled, if you will. Not everything fell apart, but their level of sophistication went backwards.
Yep.
So that would be an interesting time. There's other times. There's lots of other times.
Of course.
So if you could meet any one person, famous or not, living or dead, who would it be?
Oh, man. God, I have no idea. I mean, there's so many people. We could go modern times and say, Petrie. Or we could go way back to the past and say, Imhotep. He was the original Da Vinci, right? He was he was a philosopher, he was an engineer, he was a physician, he knew everything. And I suspect that him and Djoser I think they had suspicions about what had happened or what had led them to where they were. And I think they may have been trying to figure out if they could recreate some of the magic, right? Can we put some of these pyramids back together? Can we turn them back on? Right? Can we get to the bottom of some of this stuff? They seem to be experimenting,
right,
to some extent. So I think they'd be pretty cool to hang out with and pick their brains for a little while. I don't know any. I don't think I can think of a name of anyone before them though.
Those are good ones. Those are good ones. And we just before we move on to the next question, we had mentioned Flinders Petrie a couple times in the podcast. I was wondering, I know that this might be difficult, but could you give the audience an elevator speech on Flinders Petrie's contribution to to this space?
Yeah, before him, you had treasure hunters. You had adventurers that were coming into Egypt. They called themselves archaeologists, but they were using dynamite. They were blasting the hell out of everything, and they were taking things back to wherever they came from, whether it was Europe or North America or Asia. They were basically treasure hunters, and he did not like that. He came from a very technical background. He was a surveyor by trade, but trained by his father, and he was religiously exacting in everything he did. And so he spent the rest of his life from like 1880 on to like 1930, basically, when he died, or roughly around there, documenting and measuring everything he could. He was, I think, the most prolific of any archaeologist to publish ever, right? So he's got thousands of publications. He's got, I think, 200 books, articles, journals, everything. He went around measuring and documenting everything to preserve it. He was astounded by what he saw. He thought these people were the most advanced humans that had ever lived. He was just fascinated by this stuff, and he succeeded in bringing attention to the field. He succeeded in turning archaeology into more of a science than it had been, and he succeeded in getting some of the stuff preserved. Not all of it. They continued to loot and destroy long after him, but I think he made a tremendous contribution, probably more than anybody else.
Yeah, that's very good. Very, very, very perfect for the elevator. The door just opened. We're walking out. You used 200 books. So we had Dr. Greg Little on, who's written like 70 books. He's an expert in Native American mounds, but 200 books makes me feel lazy. All right, next rapid fire question. If you could visit any ancient site that you haven't visited yet, if there is one, what would you most want to visit?
There's still a few sites in Egypt I haven't been to. Like there's the Nat Playa. I've never been to Turkey, so I'd love to see Darren Kuyu in those areas. I've been to Jordan and Petra, but there's a lot more to see. Petra is like 17 miles long, goes into Saudi Arabia. It'd be nice to be able to actually do that one day. And then there's we have all the Pacific and Asian stuff. I think the Caroline Islands, like Namadol, all those areas I haven't been to. So I'd love to go to some of those places one day.
Yeah, Gunung Padang. We just talked to Danny Hillman about Gunung Padang this morning. That was pretty fun.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Next question: have you ever seen a UFO?
Not that I know.
Not that you know. And if you we'll just move right on to the next one. Are we living in a simulation? Yes or no?
I don't think so. But I think we can observe deja vu all over the place because there's a natural rhythm, there's a natural pattern to the universe and to life that replicates itself as above, so below. So I think just because you see those things doesn't mean you're in a simulation necessarily. I'm not saying we're not, but I think it just means that there's some inevitabilities in life.
Yeah, everything's connected, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a simulation.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Okay. I guess that's the end of the interview. We're going to wrap things up.
Thanks for coming on the show. We look forward to meeting you in person at Cosmic Summit. Keep doing what you're doing. We're going to keep doing what we can do, and all of us are going to find something out together.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll see you soon.
Hey, and thank you very much, Adam. We'll talk in a month, actually a month and a half. We'll see you then.
Yeah.